Hello, and welcome to the ONTIC Protective Intelligence Podcast. I'm Fred Burton with the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. During my years as a counterterrorism agent with the U.S. State Department and time spent as a physical security expert in the private sector, I've seen it all and met many fascinating people along the way. This podcast series explores the riveting world of safety, security, and protection through conversations with leaders in the field. I'm Fred Burton, and now on to the podcast. Hi, I'm Fred Burton, and I'm here today with Scott Stewart. Scott is Vice President at TorchStone Global, a premier global risk mitigation and security firm. He brings 35 years of analytical, investigative, and security experience, including being a member of Michael Dell's executive protection team and serving 10 years as a special agent with the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service. Scott is a popular speaker on security topics and is frequently interviewed by journalists from leading news outlets including the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, and NPR. Scott, welcome to the ONTIC Protective Intelligence Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Fred.
Scott, tell us about swatting. What is it?
Swatting is basically a form of hoax call in which a person calls up a 911 number, an emergency phone number, and then tells the police that there's some sort of active shooting, murder, kidnapping going on at a particular address in hopes of eliciting an immediate and overwhelming police response. So hence the name swatting, calling out the SWAT team to this address and having a lot of armed, excited police officers show up at the house.
And most notably, VIPs have been current trending and targets?
Yes. Lately, we have just seen hundreds of, especially politicians, judges, and celebrities targeted by swatting hoaxes.
What's your take on this trend that appears to be real problematic for those of us in this business?
It is a problematic trend, but the good news is that it's not a new one. You know, it's something that's really been around kind of since the, mid 2000s. But we're really seeing is not just the emergence of a new thing, but an acceleration of something that's already been there. So, what we're really just seeing is it's an amping up of the frequency of the swatting calls that are happening and, just the proliferation of different targets.
And I know at TorchStone, your team has written a pretty good analysis on this phenomenon, correct?
One of the things that we like to do when we're thinking about swatting is to really view it through the context of what we call the social media threat continuum, because we believe that gives people kind of a baseline understanding of how things progress to a swatting. See, swatting just doesn't usually happen out of nowhere. There's usually a series of events that lead up to it. And by understanding what these precursor activities are, it allows you to kind of prepare yourself for the potential swatting, but then to also reach out to law enforcement and give them a heads up that you could be a potential swatting target.
And for those of us that have spent a good many years in the protection space, Scott, when you're looking at this either from an estate protection or a protection team, what would be your advice as to how teams should look at this, and what would be some of the mitigation steps or things you would be thinking of ahead of time?
Again, Fred, kind of going back to that contextualization, really looking at the client's, kind of profile, see if there are people out there that have grievances, against the household, against the potential target, and then watching for those escalatory behaviors along that threat continuum. So, is the potential target being denounced? Have they been doxxed? Are those things not causing the target to change their behavior in the way the aggrieved individual is demanding? Therefore, can we progress to some sort of harassment to include swatting? So that's really the first thing, just being kind of aware of how these things develop and looking for those early signs so that you can kind of really anticipate the fact that a swatting could happen.
And when you think about it, you and I have spent a lot of time, whether it's on a protection detail with the government or in the private sector, or in essence, at an estate. What do you do if the police show up red lights and sirens and say, hey, we've got a 911 call from inside the house.
Yeah, well, hopefully you're taking a step back from that, and you have really good liaison relationship with those authorities, right? And that's one of the things that you and I were always working on, having good liaison at all levels, state, local, and federal level, with the law enforcement. So you want to have those connections ahead of time. You obviously it's much more difficult to make connections in the midst of emergency. So you really want to have those communications ahead of time. You want to talk, to those liaison officers and make sure that they're aware, of the potential of a swatting. And really, one of the things that we've seen, especially right now, with the huge uptick we've seen over the last couple of months, it's not just law enforcement officers, but 9/11 operators. Are really dispatchers are becoming much more aware of the possibility. So if you kind of give them a little bit of advance notice, hey, we've got some aggrieved people that are focused on us. They've doxed us. It seems like they're progressing towards a swatting. If you give them that information in advance, it can really help them place the call into context. And then, that response will be better. And of course, if the police do respond, the last thing we want to do is escalate, right? We want to try to de-escalate the situation as quickly as possible. And despite the fact that there have been, thousands and thousands of swatting incidents, the tragedies that have emerged from them have been, pretty few and far between. There have been a couple shootings, including one fatality, and there was another fatality from a heart attack. But by and large, most swatting calls are resolved without any sort of violence.
And I know through our collective experience over the years, if you have that liaison relationship established, whether it be with the locals, the state, or the FBI, for example, you can look at putting your residents on, like, let's say, enhanced 911. So those operators and the local first responders know that there's a high value target that lives here.
Yeah, and even beyond that, we're starting to see departments around the country put out kind of a swatting list. Here, these are potential addresses here that could be subject to swatting calls. So any calls that you receive, regarding these, these residences, be very careful.
So it really gets back to some of the things that we've been preaching for many years with a baseline threat assessment, understanding your threat landscape, knowing who those threat actors are that are out there that could haunt you.
Yeah. It really all fits hand in glove. And it can also be part of, unfortunately, things can go beyond swatting too. So that's why you also need to keep, an eye on these sorts of incidents. And certainly we've even seen with some of the politicians recently, you not only will have the swatting incidents, but you can have fixated individuals actually try to conduct a vandalism or even get to the point of trying to conduct an attack. And so, this is just one part of that continuum. And we really need to think of the entire continuum and the possibilities there. And that really reinforces why it's so important, to not only identify kind of the grievance collectors, but then to monitor their activities, monitor their communications for indications of an escalation.
And from your tracking of this phenomena, from a trending perspective, do you anticipate this to continue? Like, what are some of the drivers that could be behind this?
Oh, right now, the big driver is the election cycle, and just really the toxic political environment we find ourselves in the United States right now. And so, in the past, it was kind of lower level stuff, and you had kind of the swatting happening within these gaming communities, people that had grievances, that sort of thing. Now what we're really seeing is, it being dragged into this political realm with politicians being, swatted. And I really believe that as we grow closer to the 2024 elections here, that we're going to see a continued escalation. And unfortunately, because of the technologies and the tools that are used in swatting, it can be pretty difficult, for the authorities to pick up and to identify and then prosecute the swatters. There've been some notable successes, But by and large, most people who engage in swatting get away with it scot-free.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And from your analysis of this phenomena, have you seen any indications that some of this could be nation state sponsored, or are we talking about more than likely lone threat actors with an axe to grind?
Well, I mean, we've definitely seen kind of, swatting sweatshops or whatever, So there have been kind of some hubs that do, dozens or hundreds of swatting calls. Some of them do it as kind of a business model. Send me kind of like what we've seen the bomb threat as a business model in the past. Send me some Bitcoin and I'll swat whoever you want me to. So we kind of have that going on, but it gets really murky when we think about kind of the cyber mercenary, cyber criminal realm from some of the state sponsors out there, like the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians or North Koreans. It gets pretty murky and it's hard to divide sometimes, the difference between kind of a cyber mercenary and somebody that might work for the state or just do, contract work for the state. So there's definitely, some crossover happening there.
I think in context, we're talking about the protection, or at least I was, from an estate. But if you put this in a corporate communications or a corporate headquarters kind of phenomena, Scott, have you seen any evidence of any major multinational corporations or their headquarters being targeted for swatting?
There have been some instances of that, but it seems like it's been more directed against corporate officers. So executives and not necessarily, the headquarters, although there have been a few, but it's really kind of a more personalized attack than it is kind of a generalized attack against a large target.
So if you're that protection team out there with responsibility for an executive crew, you have to make sure that you have a good finger on the pulse.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's face it, you need to have that no matter what threat actor we're talking about, right? Whether it's just, unstable individuals, stalkers, activists, terrorists, criminals. We always need to remain alert to all these various threat actors. And this is just one more to kind of, throw in the hopper, if you will. The good news is, though, like I said, it is something that can be kind of foreseen. As we follow these grievance collectors, as we watch their communications, we see things like doxing, denunciation that allow us to see the progression along that social media threat continuum. So, like what we talk about with things like the pathway to violence or the attack cycle, looking at the social media threat continuum then just gives us a guide that helps us understand where we are in relation to these threat actors. And then it helps us take action to protect, our people against actions by them.
Process-wise, Scott, have you seen from a protocol perspective, wind back a couple comments ago you had with local police getting used to this kind of response? Are they looking at this very similar to what they would for any kind of call for service at a VIP's house, or how they're handling this any differently?
We definitely are seeing, particular jurisdictions, especially where you have a kind of concentration of targets and where they've experienced a lot of these incidents. They are getting wise. And at the high level, the FBI has actually just gone out and recently created kind of a national swatting database. And so they're really trying to look at, gathering as much intelligence they can, on these incidents in order to help track down some of these actors and hopefully, put a bit of a lid on the problem.
Yeah, that's fascinating from a national perspective. Do you know if that database is publicly accessible, or is it something that the Bureau is just trying to wrap their arms around it to look at this from a trending perspective?
Yeah, I believe it's an investigative tool for them. And so I think that what they're doing is gathering information from jurisdictions around the country and trying to put together, the pieces of the puzzle so that they can see these more active actors, the people that are very involved in the systematic swatting, and then really trying to go after them.
The interesting part, Scott, if you think about this in context to where we came from with our State Department experience, is this a U.S. phenomena predominantly, or is this happening around the globe?
Unfortunately, it is happening around the globe. And also it's happening here from actors around the globe. Just like some of the bomb threat callers that we've seen from overseas as well. So with kind of the internet today, everything's just kind of a click away.
And I would imagine, too, when you look at this from the Bureau's perspective, meaning the FBI, if they're looking at it from a national perspective, they're going to be able to triangulate in on some of those voices that are calling in these 911 centers and so forth.
Yeah, hopefully. There again, some of them are using, technologies meant to kind of mask, their voices, also kind of mask their identities. But there have been some kind of, telltale signs that some of the police departments are picking up on. One is when they have like an emergency call that comes into a non-emergency number. So instead of 911, somebody dials the regular business number of the police department, starts screaming about, a mass killing or a kidnapping. The other one is that they've seen that some of these groups have been using that, kind of text to voice capability in an effort to kind of, further obfuscate themselves. So those are, some little hints, I think, that dispatchers are starting to pick up on to help them pick up some of the swatting calls quickly.
And schools have been affected too?
Yeah, the targets have been pretty widespread.
Interesting. As you look at this over the horizon, Scott, I know this is something that you and your TorchStone team does. Where do you see this going? Meaning, if you fast forward, 90 days from now, or you look out over the horizon, what's next in this space?
Oh boy, it's almost endless, right? As we get into things like AI, deep fakes, think about that. You have a deep fake of a politician's voice or a businessman's voice making an emergency 911 call. That becomes familiar. Deep fake videos that are sent, to police departments or something. So I really think that, unfortunately, these problems are going to persist, and that, security professionals are going to have to figure out ways to continue to, kind of stay ahead of the curve, as well as law enforcement agencies across the country are really going to have to be, very alert to these sorts of scams.
Scott, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to say about this? And where can folks get access to that brilliant analysis that your team put together on this topic?
Yeah, Fred, I think we've covered the topic pretty well, but there are a couple papers on what we call the watch section of the TorchStone Global website. So if you just type in TorchStone Global, the watch, you can get there and you can read the piece that was written by my colleague, Ben West, that talks about swatting, as well as the piece that I wrote on the social media threat continuum, which, it all kind of ties together.
Well, thanks so much for being on our podcast today, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me, Fred.
This episode was brought to you by the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. Learn more at ontic.co/center. Again, that's ontic.co/center. It was produced by AJ McKeon. Our music is a track called Monteverdi Ride and was written by Brian Bristow and performed by Smoke and Novas. Check them out on Spotify. Please remember to rate and review our podcast on iTunes and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions, we'd love to hear them. You can reach us at podcasts@ontic.co or visit ontic.co/center for more information. Thanks for listening.